Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Be Sustainable podcast from UCM. We've been talking a lot in recent episodes about construction, about materials, about circular economies, and so on. Today, we're taking a slightly different direction. Our guest today is Dr. Chrissi McCarthy, and we're going to focus very much around the workplace and some of the human aspects of being in the workplace, generally in employment, but specifically within the construction and built environment sectors. Chrissi is the managing director at the Centre of Behavioural Equality, a consulting service that aims to set the standard for data and context-driven EDI by bridging the gap between research practice and employee experience. Chrissi's background is in construction, having worked in a variety of engineering and management roles early in her career, and she eventually shifted her focus to EDI and has held roles and memberships in a range of institutions in the sector, including the CIOB, Chartered Institute of Building, and the Construction Industry Council Diversity Panel. So is very well positioned to talk to us about this today. Now, Chrissi, I know your experience certainly with the Centre of Behavioural Equalities is far wider than the construction sector, far wider than the built environment. But I think your personal journey is very interesting and very relevant to what a lot of our listeners will be experiencing. So could we start off there? Could you tell us a little bit about your sort of, I keep using journey in the X Factor sense, but a little bit about your early career and sort of how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I don't know. My path is quite enough to be a journey. It was just a bundle of accidental things I loved. So I started out like many people in construction in that I wanted to do what my dad was doing. Like I just wanted to spend more time with him. And so when I was 13 years old, I remember him saying, like he was supposed to be going to work with my uncle, but my uncle decided to get quite drunk instead and went missing for like 3 days. So I said, I'll go with you. And my dad said no. And I told him that was sexist. And his response was, I don't want a 13-year-old working on site with me, not a 13-year-old girl. It's your age. But in the end, we compromised. He said if I got a hard hat by the next morning that I could go with him. So, of course, I got one. I'm stubborn. It's a reoccurring theme. And I went with him and worked on the Jubilee Line extension in London. Like this is way back in the 80s, like different times, different things. And I just fell in love. I fell in love with this beautiful, it was one of the most beautiful things I've seen in my life, just this hole full of ladders and scaffolding and drilling and machines and concrete and steel. And it was, well, you know when you're in love, didn't you? And that's what I wanted to do. And I got railroaded because I kept being told that's not what I should want to do. But the stubborn point played back in. And I eventually went into the construction industry and did that for about 10 years all told. And I loved the job. I loved I love drainage and concrete and steel. But what I didn't love was the experience that I had, the things surrounded it, the way that I was treated as a human, all told.
What sort of examples are there of how did that manifest itself? That's probably a better way of phrasing the question.
Yeah, so it was kind of manifested on two levels. First up, it was the kind of these overarching things. So the long hours culture within construction. So you're looking at a basic of a 60-hour working week, just between Monday and Friday when you're including travel. And this was back, I don't know if it's still going on now, where you'd be put on a site further away with this common belief that you're more likely to end up at work on time if you have further to travel, which is, it's extraordinary logic, but well-held logic on sites when I was there. So you'd usually spend an hour getting to work, then you'd have like a 10 to 12-hour working day, and then another hour getting home. So it's exhausting work. It's relentless because we're building things and we don't always know what's out there, what's going to happen. So there's an extraordinary amount of stress within the hours that you're in. And that comes from different levels, which means people are stressed and treat each other in that way that people do when they're stressed and they don't feel supported and they don't feel looked after. So on one level, I mean, it's not massively surprising that as an industry, we've got these horrific suicide rates of, 4 times more likely. But also then on top of that, there were experiences that I had related to gender. But one thing that I think is really important to say is this doesn't have to be, and this isn't always the way that construction is. This is something that is created by organisations. And I've certainly worked these little tiny pockets of sites where that didn't happen. And those were very beautiful things that gave me such hope, because I just had the best time. For me, the feeling of building things is extraordinary. The fact that in my day job, I would get to go up in a cherry picker or a crane. It felt like I was cheating something somehow. That I got to go look down drainage and giant manholes, like this secret world that no one else got to know about. I got to decide whether concrete was strong enough to stand to protect a building. These are extraordinary things. And let alone that feeling of us all building it together. I think when you have a good site, and those things can and do hopefully increasingly exist, I don't know there's a better feeling or place to work. So I still hang on for the potential of the construction industry, because I love that more than I think I could ever love any other workplace.
And I think that love very much still shines through. I know you've sort of moved on from it a little bit, but it is still the main love, isn't it? And any time that I've spoken to you in the past, you will always stress, there are challenges, there are problems, but there is beauty and wonder there as well. And I think the point you make is really important, that some employers are better than others, some are great, some are less great, and it's the environment that they create. And I suppose that is that what led you into what you do now in terms of supporting employers to become better at this kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting, because I often found it wasn't necessarily some employers were better than others, as some sites were better than others. Construction's really interesting in that a lot of times sites will operate as their own mini businesses, quite distinct from the larger organisation. And don't get me wrong, where an organisation has done the larger work around it, you're going to see a frequency in those kind of sites and that kind of ethos. But where the employers haven't, those pockets still do exist as well. And so, yeah, so that's what I look at now. Is my work's all about, basically, I was really interested in the fact that when I was being discriminated against in construction, which, this was like the 2000s, the late 90s, that just happened all the time, every day, at different levels. If you'd have asked me then, I wouldn't have necessarily agreed with you, because I was keeping my head down, and I really firmly believed in the idea that I chose this industry, I should put up with it. And also, if someone didn't mean to harm me, it probably wasn't discrimination. And, I couldn't see that immediate effect. So I just thought, if I just keep my head down, if I just keep swimming, then it'll all be okay. But then what started to interest me was two things. One, when equality approaches had they didn't make the situation better, they made it worse. And that I found really interesting. And two, I kind of looked up, really. There's a point where you look up and you don't see any women. Like at the time, I didn't see any women above me. Not that had come from an operational site management, certain engineering role up through the company. There were some brilliant women that were making it as quantity surveyors, but I just didn't see that anywhere within site management and setting out engineering. And that's what led me to start to think, maybe this isn't me, because that's the wonderful fun thing you do first, is decide, I'm clearly just a terrible person that no one can get on with and is entirely inept, which is why I'm never getting promoted at the same rate as my peers who are doing the same job with the same qualifications. And then I suppose an exciting and terrifying thing is working out, actually, I am clever, I am capable, I am skilled. Oh, I could go do this somewhere where it's valued. And I think that's such a key thing to understand. People don't necessarily leave because they're not good enough. I think more often they leave because they realize how good they are. And for me, it's about now helping companies to understand that they have some autonomy on they have a lot of autonomy on how people are created, how environments and cultures are created. And that's a brilliant thing. That's an amazing thing. We often talk about equality, diversity, inclusion so much as this kind of like a punishment tool. You're not doing this. You have to do this. And the kind of ideas that we place it upon, diversity is always good for business. they're sketchy at best. And the reason for that is when I remember a company I worked for, and I was placed in there because they wanted more women. And because of that, even though I could do the job, they didn't allow me to do the job. They basically sat me in a room with a computer and told me to do data entry. So you better believe I was a grumpy human being. I wasn't making that building site any better. Like, I'm sorry to everyone I worked with, but I was furious, just every day, furious typing. And so I wasn't making that team better. And I wasn't making that team better because of what was happening to me and what I perceived was being stolen from me, which was my career, my opportunity to progress. So the idea that diversity, full stop, makes everything better misses the need for inclusion.
Yeah.
You need to be treating people well. You need to be valuing them. You need to be listening to them appropriately. Because without that, you're just going to get churn of people, because who wants to be somewhere where they're not? So my work now, going back to like 100 years ago when you asked me, sorry, Mike, looks at helping organizations see what the real opportunities are contextually and what the constraints are around those opportunities, and what can you create that's quite honestly going to give you return on your investment, and also create a place where people get to do something they love in an environment they love. Because if I'd have had that, there's no two ways about it, I would still be in the construction industry right now.
And those, I suppose, are the two big incentives for employers: talent retention. If you treat people well and they are included and they feel safe and well and able to be themselves, then they will stay and they will you will retain their experience and their skills and their knowledge. And happy people being allowed to do a good job well will have an overall positive benefit to the team, to the site, to the organisation. So yeah, absolutely. Thinking then wider than this, as I've said, you've since those that sort of early and developing career stages in the construction built environment space, you're in other industries now. Do you see the same problems across sectors, or are they nuanced by whatever the job at hand is?
Well, both things are going on. So there are nuances. One of the lovely things about construction is it shows you very large and very in your face, pretty much every type of discrimination or inequality you're going to encounter, which means that you can then see it in the nuance in other sectors. So like I work a lot in academia now with universities like Manchester and Sheffield, and you can see the same mechanisms, but much more nuanced. And I don't think that I would have been able to notice that quite as quickly as I can now if I hadn't kind of seen it large first. So there's that, but then there's also specific challenges to construction and specific challenges to universities that just to do with the systems and the way that we set things up and the things that we believe. And then if we go a step above that, we've got some real challenges within the field of research in equality and diversity and practice around equality and diversity at the moment. And when I say challenges, I don't mean that as if it's unique to any kind of I'll talk about it as business improvement because I come from an organisational sociologist position, as opposed to some of the people that are doing great work around like activism or in the legal space or the psychological space. That's not where I play, but I very much value the work that others do there. But I'm looking at how do we improve organisations specifically. And so when we look at the research and the practice around that space, we've, equality is really in its infancy. So there was a lot of years where it was lobbied for, very much like health and safety, really, when we were first trying to implement that. And now I think that lobbying period is done, and always more work to do, but that main piece to get it recognised as to what it is. Now we kind of need to move on to this new nuanced look. And for me, one of the main challenges, two main challenges really. One is that we tend to come at equality as my intent is good. I've got a good intent for this initiative that I want to put in place, and therefore my outcome will be good. And quite frankly, that doesn't always happen. And that's because of unintended consequences, which, if you're interested, the field of critical diversity studies will show you a lot about that. And so that means that our equality approaches don't always get us to where we want to go, and they can plateau. But that's very much like health and safety. Our intent is good. I'll give you a quick story to show that. So once when I worked in construction, we got the remit to give everyone safety glasses. Brilliant idea, right? Stop things from getting in people's eyes. Problem was, we had the tiniest budget I've ever come across. So we got the cheapest glasses. These things scratched the second you put them on a desk. What we did was visually impair an entire building site in the name of health and safety. Gets better, Mike. We won an award for it. So our intent was good, but our outcome didn't hit. And I think to criticize that in order to improve health and safety is a useful, valuable, and critically important thing to do. To criticize that because you can't be bothered to wear safety glasses is an entirely different thing. And I think it's exactly the same within the equality space. To criticize our equality work in order that we can improve is exactly what needs to be happening to get us to where we want to go, which is equal spaces where people can do the work that they love and that are able to do. But if you're criticizing it because you can't be, well, you don't want to share your toys, that's something very, very different. So that's one problem. And then the other problem is context. A lot of equality work at the moment is copy and paste. One organisation does one thing, so another organisation does the same. And one of the things that we know from the research is there's no real, besides strategy and management buy-in, nothing else seems to work consistently across all environments. And I think that makes sense. Organisations at different levels, different times, different resources, different cultures, different environments. And so I think our next big step is to move to a more contextual approach to equality that also takes a really strong look at behaviour. What are you implementing these initiatives into, and considering whether that behaviour is going to be a problem to implementation or an advantage to implementation.
So as an organisation, as an employer, I could have very good inclusive recruitment practices, bring some fantastic diverse talent on board into an organisation, drop them into the business, and then watch them spectacularly fail because it's not embedded all the way through and the behaviours just aren't there to allow that inclusivity to flourish. Is that an example of the problem?
That's absolutely the example. And we can see where that ends up as well. If we keep following that train of thought, if we take an individual, say, who that happens to, they go in and they have this bad experience, and now they wait the year and a half that it takes to look good on your CV, and then they find their next role, and the same thing happens. And now maybe they're towards their end of career. And we know with women, for the research, I haven't been able to find the research on any other marginalised group, so sorry. Women tend to last 5 years on average in the construction industry. When we get to the end of the careers, that's when we start looking to see who's got the awards. We start to look to see who's going to treat me okay. And if we go into that environment and the same thing happens, and that's supposed to be the best place, what choice do we reasonably have? And then what happens when those people leave the industry? What do they say to their families, to their friends? Because historically, predominantly people come into this industry, and before they do, they turn around to someone and say, you worked in construction. What did you think? And this for me is really one of the most important things at the moment that I think we keep missing as a sector. We have around 3 million people working in construction. And I don't need a survey to tell me the stats are already there with our suicide rates, with our really high levels of stress for our average population, for the population that looks like it might belong in this industry. And if that is the feeling of that population, then what's likely to be the experience of someone else? And so we really need to tackle this issue, because people can't keep talking about the skill shortage and going, well, just encourage more people in, when people are literally dying to get out.